but we will hear from the TUV leader Jim Allister, who I spoke to earlier today, and I began by asking Mr Allister to explain why, in his view, we now seem to be on the verge of a deal.
Well, I think that's explained by the fact that the Sinn Fein have had a gun to Peter Robinson's head, where he's had a choice to make. Either he rolls over, gives them their seminal demand for policing and justice, or he faces the collapse of the Assembly and an election. And being petrified of an election, he's going to choose to roll over. Of course, he'll be dressed up in all sorts of fancy make-believe about what it isn't about. But the reality is that Sinn Fein, who have always had this key strategic demand of Brits out, of policing and justice, of getting it away from London, onto the island of Ireland, setting it up for the all-Ireland policing and justice that they desire to see evolve, are about to be gifted, I fear, that strategic demand. And then when you factor into that the fact that Sinn Fein has this animus, this intent to meddle in policing and justice, and will be gifted an absolute veto at all key issues, and you see examples of it as to what is their motivation. At the time when the South Armagh gentleman was subject to the rightful investigations of the Assets Bureau, we had Sinn Féin ministers saying, this is why we need policing and justice. Why? So as they could meddle in those issues? You know, really, I think this is taking us very much in the wrong direction.
But aren't we prejudging that element because we haven't seen quite how this deal, if there is going to be a deal, has arranged the relationship between Justice Minister and the rest of the executive? The DUP may have built-in safeguards there, so Sinn Féin cannot, as you say, meddle.
Well, either he's going to be a full member of the executive, where every piece of legislation he proposes, every key financial decision, every cross-cutting issue, every controversial decision requires to go through the executive, and Sinn Féin have their veto there to block and to force change. Or he's going to be a total puppet of those who appoint him, the joint first ministers. So either way, it's a lose-lose for unionism.
Does it make any difference if, say, the Justice Minister was a unionist? There's some speculation in one of the papers today about the possibility maybe of an offer being made to either the Ulster Unionists or even to somebody like Lady Sylvia Herman. Would that make a difference from the point of view of unionist confidence or not?
Well, Lady Sylvia Herman isn't a member of the Assembly. And I think it would require legislative change to make that possible. But remember, we're only talking about a 2-year stopgap deal, because they've already decided that at the end of 2 years in 2012, all is up for renegotiation, and Sinn Féin can present themselves to take the ministry themselves at that stage. And indeed, one of the options considered at a time was that the powers could even revert to the joint first ministers. So Martin McGuinness would have his direct hand on every decision. So whatever is patched together to give the appearance of progress in order to try and buy some credibility for this miserable failed executive, it at best is a stopgap measure, which isn't, I don't think, going to fool or convince anyone.
When the two Prime Ministers met in Downing Street this week, I think Brian Cowan made the argument that pushing ahead with devolving justice was the best and most effective way of combating what he called the murderous few determined to wreck the process. He linked it very specifically with that attack on a Catholic police officer at Randallstown. On that broad level, hasn't he got a point?
No, he hasn't. You know, we have always seen down through the years of this so-called peace process, this twin-track approach, that when it suited, muscle was applied. When it suited the Republican leadership, muscle was applied at various times, where it was Canary Wharf or other things. And, you know, the brotherhood of the Republican movement doesn't really make me distinguish very much between which brand of the IRA at any particular time is pulling the trigger when the other brand stands to gain. And of course it is part of the same blackmail process of trying to attain political objectives through the use of violence. But you know, people really do need to ask themselves, why is it so vital to IRA Sinn Féin to have policing and justice devolved? Why is that a die-in-the-ditch issue? Well, the answer is because who controls policing and justice controls the most seminal constitutional attachment issues of any nation. And that is why, in order to end British control, that Sinn Féin are so intent upon getting policing and justice onto the island of Ireland. And the next agitation will be, of course, then to get all Ireland institutions to deal with policing injustice, and having rolled over once to the Sinn Fein gun at the head, you can expect another one to the DUP's head down the road.
Now, at the height of this crisis, there was, of course, a council by-election in Lurgan. The DUP wasn't standing, so it was impossible to judge how the public were reacting to them. But your own candidate, David Calvert, got just 750 votes compared to nearly 2,500 for the Ulster Unionist Joanne Dobson. Does that show that the UUP is garnering more support from these latest events than yourselves?
No, I think that area in particular was always a very strong Ulster Unionist area. Even at the high water mark of DUP support back in 2005, the Ulster Unionists were still stronger than them in those particular wards. So everyone knew what that outcome was going to be. But I was well satisfied that we retained in or about the share of the Unionist vote that we had in the European election. And the message of that from a PR election is that when you have a PR election with multiple seats right across this province, TV is poised to take that sizable section that will make the difference in Stormont, that will force the change. We will be the catalyst for change, and we will be the catalyst that will make sure that Martin McGuinness does not become First Minister, something the DUP was willing to gift to him as a means of duressing Unionists into voting DUP when they allowed that shameful legislative change to be made back in 2006. So I believe that Craigavon confirms, as Dromore did, as the European election did, that come a province-wide PR election, TUV will have a very sizable bulkhead of traditional unionists who will not bend and budge, as you're about to see DUP MLAs bend and budge for the sake of office in the coming days.